Good morning, everybody. Encourage everybody to use the chat to write out your question, but I think each presenter will also provide an opportunity for questions after they're done. So with that, I'm going to get started on the project development process. The training includes presentations in partnership with WisDOT, Federal Highways, American Public Works Association. The presenters are all either WisDOT or APWA representatives, and they'll introduce themselves as they go through the videos. This next graphic is you'll see this in many of the. It goes from planning and programming, which are the first part of the process, into design, construction, and then project closeout. The best source of information is always your local regional office, and this slide describes the people that are currently involved in the local program, each in each of the 5 regional offices. You've got project managers and that are focused on design and construction, as well as the supervisor. Each region also has a programming engineer that is also listed on this graphic. So with that, next, the first training module is.
Okay, so I presented the programming video here to understand that the final project scope, the improvement type, the estimated cost, and the delivery schedule is the responsibility of the local sponsor. WisDOT will assist in the project, but it's really the local sponsor's project. And that's been one of the transitions as we move forward with the local program to lower our costs and to improve the delivery of these projects. Second key point that should be mentioned is that the management of the delivery and the preliminary engineering schedule, the schedule that leads up to the letting of the project, is truly the local sponsor and their design consultant. It's critical that we maintain the schedule once a schedule has been approved. Dictates the improvement concept and the scope of work that was approved at the original application. So, thank you.
Good morning, I'm Brian Edwards, and I did the presentation for Consultant Services. I am the local program project manager in the Northeast region. First, before I get into my 3 takeaways from the presentation, is there any questions out there that anybody may have in regards to consultant selection, the contract, negotiations, RFP, etc.? Okay, hearing none, I guess I'll just go into the next slide, please. So some of the key points from consultant services that I like to just mention is start your consultant selection as soon as possible. It always takes longer than you expect. Even before your state municipal agreement is signed or right after that's signed, I would encourage everyone to begin their consultant selection process immediately. That process can take anywhere from 6 to 9 weeks just to get a selection made. Especially if you're doing an RFP or doing any type of interviews, that could take even longer. Then the actual getting the contract processed, negotiated, and processed and executed in Madison takes anywhere from 2 to 6 months. So time is of the essence, especially if you have a short window for design. Second point is to be sure to follow the qualification-based selection process, often referred to as QBS. If you do not follow that process, you could jeopardize the use of your federal and or state funds. As part of that qualification-based selection, be sure you do not accept or entertain any cost proposals from consultants as part of the solicitation. Do not discuss any type of cost leading up to the solicitation, during the solicitation, until a consultant is selected and approved. And lastly, keep documentation of the entire process from the selection committee, your notes, everything needs to be documented and kept in case you are ever audited by the state or by FHWA.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I know Brian, we did have a question that came in earlier about using a consultant track to help manage a project. Wondering if you want to answer that now in regards to the scope of a design consultant contract.
Sure. So I believe the question was, can they utilize a consultant to manage the project on behalf of the LPA? And if so, could that be part of the design contract? And I guess the second question would be if that would be eligible for funding. If the local would like to hire or contract with a consultant to do the administrative services that are typically done by the LPA, those are not eligible for federal or state funds and would not be part of that design contract. And it would not be the same. It would not be the same consultant that's doing the design work as well. So, for example, there's some communities out there that currently do that. They have a separate contract with a consultant that does do the oversight on behalf of the local agency and is the point of contact for all their projects. They still have separate design consultants doing the design work, and then that point of contact for that LPA is just that other. Hopefully that explained that well enough. If not, obviously you can email me.
Thanks, Brian. Next topic is Doug Senso, who's going to talk a little bit about preliminary roadway and bridge design.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, my name is Doug Senso with R.A. Smith consulting firm. I'm a senior project manager, and I'm just going to talk about my takeaways from the preliminary roadway and bridge design process. So if you could advance the slide to my takeaways. So my key points in the preliminary roadway and bridge design process are: understand that in the preliminary design process, there's really two concurrent and connected paths. There's the design and plan development path, which takes you to the 60% design milestone. And concurrently, at the same time, you should be working on design and reporting. And ultimately, those two paths are concurrent, connected, and they come together in the design study report, which caps off the preliminary design process. And that's my second point, that the design study report approval really is the goal of the preliminary design process and the key to allowing the other critical processes to proceed, such as the right-of-way plat being approved so land acquisition can begin, and also so you can begin your final design of the project. Finally, I think as Brian Bleasner mentioned at the beginning of this, for the local public agencies, please review and be aware of your responsibilities, your approval responsibilities of the design, of the preliminary design reports and in the preliminary design process, because they have changed. You have more responsibilities for approvals. So with that, I would open it up for any questions on this overview of the preliminary roadway and bridge design process, if there are any out there. Well, not hearing any immediately, certainly you can contact me or others at your DOT region, and they can help answer those questions also. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Our next presenter is Fred Wisner, who's going to talk about the environmental process.
Hey, everyone. The first, I'll give you a brief background. I'm an engineer in the technical services section in central office. So I wanted to give you some key takeaways from this, some points to remember to help maybe keep your process smoother, or at least plan ahead for some rougher road. First off, you're going to hear this periodically in those presentations. Try not to change your scope, because you're going to face delays in the other various avenues of the design process, which are also going to face it when you have to re-coordinate with some of the different agencies or tribal governments or others, the public in general. Yeah, you'll see in the bullets here that you might have to do additional public involvement, and sometimes that means going back to a city council meeting that's another 30 days away, etc. Something to keep in mind. Number two, remember that if you have some of your cities, municipalities, or towns are in areas with endangered or threatened resources, and a lot of times the studies are seasonal. So you're not going to be able to get to it till the spring, summer, potentially the fall, to get out there and do surveys to see what exactly is out there, including wetlands. You can't identify the wetlands within detail on a lot of bridge projects till you're in the non-winter season. The other thing is try to avoid impacts, essentially buying property or impacting parks, refuges, historic properties, etc. And one more bullet that isn't on there is when you're developing your public involvement and you're writing your environmental document, there's a section on purpose and need in both those venues. Remember, the purpose is the problem you're trying to solve, not a solution. So when you go to the public, use the purpose is the problem. The need that you have to develop is the data that substantiates there is a problem. Keep that in mind when you're developing your environmental document or your public involvement plan. I guess with that, if anybody has any questions, we're having a little bit best just to send it to the email, and one of us will respond to your questions. Does anybody have anything that they would like to say? If not, thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Getting a couple questions that we're gonna ask at the end of the session. So if you've put something in the chat box, we haven't missed it. So our next presenter is Gary Poluski, who's going to talk about real estate acquisition.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you. Again, my name is Carrie Parleski. I am the statewide local program real estate facilitator, and I will happily go through the 3 takeaways for real estate. The big one is always comply with the Uniform Act. This is a federal regulation. It pretty much covers everything. Our manual covers everything that is required in the Uniform Act. If we are audited by either the state or federal highways and you're found to be not conforming with the Uniform Act, things might not go well. Again, the best practice is to follow our real estate manual, and you should have no problem. The second item is schedule enough time to clear your right-of-way to meet project milestones. Remember to allow at least 150 days to acquire a parcel. That's not all the parcels on a project, that's an individual parcel. Usually when projects get compressed, they try to find time to take time from real estate, and there's a lot of statutorily mandated requirements for how many days you have to negotiate and to offer an appraisal and so forth. So it's really the best practices to schedule at least 150 days to acquire right of way. And also good faith negotiation is a must. It can appear that you're coercing a property owner with threats. You should document everything that you discuss, And of course, you should always plan for issues. You may run into where initially the title was clear and at the end something comes up. So the more time that you have available, it'll be the easier it will be to address any issues that arise. And finally, the most important thing is the almost golden rule. It's taken directly from FHWA, where they find if we can't provide documentation, then it didn't happen. So we're more than happy to talk you through any sort of documents or forms that you need. We've got the forms posted on our website. We are incorporating reads into the local program, which is a database that we use at the DOT that we're encouraging local municipalities to use to aid in their documentation. And anyone out there who would like to know more about that, please let me know, and I'm happy to provide you with information as well as training. So if there's any questions, please submit them, and I'm happy to address any concerns that you might have.
Jared, who's going to talk about railroad coordination.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I wanted to get to some key takeaways on railroad coordination. I'm Jared Kinziger, Regional Railroad Coordinator for the Northeast and North Central regions. I have one key takeaway, pretty simple. Work with your regional railroad coordinator, and there's a link on this page. Plus, it's on the DOT's website. And here's a map that shows each of our areas and who the contacts are for each. You got to look by county. And our regional railroad coordinators can help answer any of the questions. I mean, the presentation goes into more detail about specific things that you are good to know, but when in doubt, just ask the railroad coordinator, and they are the ones responsible to help you. So if anybody has any questions with the presentation, definitely, send them to us at that link that's in with the presentations. So thanks.
Thanks, Jared. Next, we have Abby Williamson, who's going to.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Williamson, one of the statewide utility engineers at WisDOT. So some key points for utilities. Cannot stress enough to schedule as much time as possible for utility coordination, and just start communication with utilities as early as possible during early planning and designing efforts. This will help down the road, and there's almost always going to be something that comes up. Plan changes, utility company doesn't have resources to get stuff done, things will always get delayed. So just schedule as much time as you can for utility coordination, because something will always get delayed. Identify potential conflicts. Technically, it's the utility's responsibility to know where they conflict with the design project, but even in 30–60% design, just looking for those potential conflicts, and if you can address them in your design by moving around them, or working with the utility companies to see if they have other solutions that will really keep costs down to the utility ratepayers and the state taxpayers for the project. And then be present during relocations. I know at this point you've technically signed the statement that utility coordination has been completed, but there's a lot that can really delay the construction if you're not keeping close contact with utilities, keeping track of their schedules and their status updates. What we recommend is 30 days before they're supposed to start their relocations, get in touch with them, make sure that they're in the process of applying for their permit, that they're getting materials ordered and getting a contract ready with whoever's going to be doing their work. It just helps things flow better, and that way everyone is on the same page and is updated on the schedule. So those would be the key points for utilities.
Thanks, Abby. I just want to emphasize Abby's last point about continued coordination after the design is complete. We've had some pretty difficult issues this year in particular. with utilities not relocating either on time or meeting their commitments in the project plan. So keeping on top of them post-design and pre-construction is really, really important. Our next presenter is Phil Roberts, who's going to talk about final design and PS&E.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Phil Roberts with Omni Associates, and I'm going to talk about the final design and PS&E. Really, it's fairly simple when it comes to the final design. You've got a lot of work done. You've got a lot of your documentation's already been completed. As Doug indicated in the preliminary design phase, that takes you through the approval of the design study report. At the end of the preliminary design phase, you kick into the final design phase. While you had a lot of work you've already completed, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. But some of the key points here are, if you have a bridge project, your structure plans need to be submitted 3 months prior to the PS&E, and those plans go to the Bureau of Structures. The other key point here is, I thought I had updated a couple other things, but as Abby indicated on the utility side, your utility work needs to be clear. And then as Carrie just indicated on the real estate side, your right-of-way acquisition needs to be cleared at the end of the final design phase. And then you get to your PS&E, which gets e-submitted to DOT. And then you get into the bidding phase. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay, thanks, Phil. Our next presentation is Matt Banana, who's going to talk about the letting and construction management.
All right, as Brian said, I'm Matt Banana. I'm a local program project manager with the Northwest region. And yeah, we're here to talk about the letting and construction administration, and just kind of talk about the 3 main takeaways. Kind of to go back on what Phil was talking about, and also to echo Carrie, Jared, and Abby with rail, real estate, and utilities. Among other areas, those are probably the 3 most important and the 3 most missed areas that stop a project from being cleared to let. And that's why it is so important to start coordination early. At PS&E, all the agreements have to be completed. And then once a project is cleared to be let and advertised, when the contractors start to develop their bids on the project, they'll oftentimes have questions on the plan. And if the other point that I want to make is that if a local is ever contacted directly by a contractor, they should direct the contractor to ask their questions via the Bid Express website. And if for whatever reason you do answer any of their questions and really make any statements pertaining towards the plan, all those conversations should be reported to WisDOT so we can record those on the Bid Express website. This kind of helps keep a level playing field for all the contractors that might bid on the project. And then after letting, if the project goes over 5% or more above the engineer's estimate, local concurrence will be needed in order for the department to award that contract. And that is needed by Thursday at noon after the letting. So the third point is just make sure you're available right after the letting, as the department will be contacting you for your concurrence. So if any other questions on my presentation or on my 3 points.
Sandy to talk about change management.
Good morning. I'm Sandy Carpenter. I am the local program manager with WisDOT in the Northeast region, and I'm going to talk about some key takeaways on the presentation about change management for design and construction. So the first thing that I'd like to stress is that it is the responsibility of the project sponsor to monitor the scope, which you've heard on some previous presentations, but the schedule and budget throughout the life of your project. The sooner that a change in any of these three have been identified, the soonest that they've been identified, that is the time for you to contact the department project manager or the local program manager to talk about the possibility of a change management submittal. One of the things that is important to know, though, is that the approval of a change management request is not guaranteed. A lot of variables come into play on whether or not a submittal will be approved. For additional cost increases, that will be dependent upon the eligibility of the request, as well as the funding levels for a particular fiscal year that your project has already been programmed for. The per program and per fiscal year, those funding levels are limited. So if the program is fully funded for a particular fiscal year, the department has no ability to approve any additional funding for your project. That is specifically as it's going through the design phase, and you're looking for some additional construction dollars. Cost increase request during construction, the approved contract mod. Schedule changes also are going to vary depending upon if you are requesting a let date change within the same fiscal year, or if you are requesting for your project is moved for an entirely different fiscal year. So the sooner that you have identified that potential need and you coordinate with the department, the better the chances would be we may be able to accommodate that for you.
Thanks, Sandy. That's the end of our presentations, and I know we promised to collect any chat questions and answer them here at the end. We've only gotten one so far, and that was regarding Brian's answer about paying for additional management. I think Brian indicated that if a local would want additional help in managing a project, that would be a separate contract between them, the local, and a second consultant. Related to that, we had a question about whether or not WisDOT could be contracted in that same way. Theoretically, we could. I think there would be a lot of pitfalls in that kind of a situation. I think that would be a pretty unique arrangement. I mean, WisDOT is certainly expert in managing the process. Our oversight is compensated, through the SMA. So I guess if there would be additional need there, there could be an accommodation as part of the SMA to pay for that. But again, that would be a pretty unique circumstance. Thank you. Question is, does local concurrence, if over 5% engineer estimate, require the local agency council to approve? If so, is it practical for this to occur? And how are agencies accomplishing this? Anybody out there would share a perspective on this?
Yeah, Brian, this is Matt Vanetta. I can address that. On different projects in the past that have gone over 5%, and yeah, I need a local council to concur. We usually, as long as we have information saying we need a little bit more time, that's all right. It's just a matter of being able to communicate that back to central office to say award should be coming within the next week or two. But typically we would like at least some sort of maybe like an emergency meeting or special session to discuss the project in order to get concurrence.
Brian, this is Sandy. May I piggyback on that?
Absolutely.
So what I'd like to point out, though, is that this 5% over engineering estimate and the situation that Matt just responded to, this is separate than whether or not you may need additional funds for your project. We've noticed that there is some confusion by the locals on when the bids and the lets come in greater than the engineer estimate, and whether or not they have enough funding on their projects. So your project may have enough funding already approved for your project that even with the increase in let costs, which you would still need to go through the process that Matt just described, you know, to provide concurrence. But if there's already enough approved funding for your project to have it maintain what is typically the 80-20 funding level, there wouldn't necessarily need to be any action on the locals' part. If you do not have enough funding to maintain the 80%, that is a point that's going to, you may want to consider submitting a change management requesting additional funding. The regions will typically do a funding review at the time of letting to take a look at where your funding levels are in relation to the let cost for your project as well. But those are two separate reviews that are occurring at the time of letting.
Just got another question. Are we able to use this program on bridges that border another state? I know if we've got some regions out there that have border bridges that maybe could help answer that.
Yes, the local bridge program you can have projects that apply for funding that are border bridges if they are eligible structures. There needs to be an agreement between the two communities on either side of the border. There needs to also be a determination of who is going to take the lead for the particular project. We've had situations where the neighboring state and neighboring community has taken the lead, and the funding that the local within the state of Wisconsin receives through our local program. We just set up an agreement and everything gets managed by, let's just say, the Michigan DOT or the Minnesota DOT. So locals need to communicate between themselves first before they decide to apply for funding in each of the state's programs. Also, depending upon what the border state is and their program, they may have a different criteria and different policy as far as what is eligible for the funding for that particular bridge program. Some states, their local programs, they don't provide funding for the engineering services. That would be something that would need to be looked at and understood.
So isn't there also a question of ownership? Who owns the bridge plays into that?
It could, but if the locals, make the determination of one over the other, I mean, the one example that we had in the Northeast region, it was equally shared. So the city of Marinette chose to be the lead on that particular project. I don't know what's happened in other regions on the western side of the state.
Okay.
Any other questions? Well, hearing none, this concludes our presentation today and our live chat. I want to thank everybody for participating. Kind of living in this new world, I guess this was our attempt to get some of this information out to folks in a unique way, and hopefully this was a successful effort. You're honored to confirm the sessions that you viewed on the videos. All workshop videos, including this session, will be available for ongoing reference, and there's a link there on the WisDOT local program page. And then lastly, we'd appreciate your feedback on how this type of workshop worked for you. You can email your constructive thoughts and suggestions to that email address. If you haven't had a chance to look at the videos, again, I encourage you to do that. Those are much longer presentations and go into a higher level of detail on these topics. Also, I just wanted to reference you and highlight the listserv feature on the local programs webpage. That again is a great reference point for folks that are looking for information related to local program. So with that, thank you everybody for your participation, and have a good rest of the day.